and welcome to episode 31 of That 60s Recording Podcast, the podcast that has conversations inspired by the golden era of recording. And welcome to Tuesday and the now weekly That 60s Recording Podcast. This is the second weekly episode I've done now, or third if you... Is it second? Yeah, second or third, depending on where you start counting. And this week I'm continuing my conversation with Jack Casady from Jefferson Airplane and Hot Tuna, which we'll get to in a moment. Just to let you know that this week's isolated drum stems that I'm sending out today, the day that you hear this, if it's the Tuesday, which would be Tuesday the 8th of June, this week's stems are Ticket to Ride. Can't believe I haven't got to Ticket to Ride yet at all. So this is stems set number 49, and I've got a big one planned for 50, which I haven't actually recorded yet, but it's going to be a mammoth task, and hope you might even be able to guess what it is from that. So if you're interested in that, you can visit my website. allyouneedisdrums.com, and there's the full archive of all of the isolated drums I've made up there, if you're interested to listen to any of those. You can also join my mailing list to make sure that you receive those weekly, and they'll come out every Tuesday, just like the podcast. So that's that little bit of admin. And I hope you're all doing really well, and I hope you're all enjoying this conversation. So we start off talking about Jack's musical influences and what he was listening to growing up. Very, well, maybe they are what you'd expect. I was going to say they're not what you expect, but well, anyway, I'll let you be the judge. And then as we move through towards the end, it just gives some really sage advice. I mean, he's such a wise guy in the sense that he is a wise guy, not a wise guy like they would be on The Sopranos. Anyway, I'm waffling. Let's get straight down to the episode. Here we go, part 2 with Jack Casady. Sort of music that you're referencing then is so it's just unusual for somebody so young to be listening to that music. I mean, I'm interested to know. So I remember buying a John Coltrane record when I was about 16, 17, and I think it was a Love Supreme that I bought, and it just blew my mind completely. I had it was just crazy, and I can remember not understanding it and then revisiting it a couple of years later, and it began to not necessarily make sense to me, but it became listenable to me. Yeah. What were you thinking about when you were listening to all this stuff? How were you picturing how this music fit in your head?
Well, I was fortunate enough to see every one of these people many times in little jazz clubs. I parked my chair right in front of Charles Mingus, wow. Right in front of Eric Dolphy. I saw the Montgomery brothers, where Montgomery's playing bass, which was sacrilege then. I remember, Nat Hentoff, one of those guys in Downbeat magazine, saying, "You just can't have an electric bass guitar in jazz," and all that, And the Montgomery brothers with Wes Montgomery and his brother Monk, seeing these little upstairs clubs playing, and I just parked myself in front of him. But, the very next night, I might be down to Howard Theater seeing Ray Charles, And the very next night, I'd be in a country club seeing, the rockabilly bands. Or I remember in the late 50s, Yorm and I go down to LaRae, Virginia to see the Carter family, Mother Maybelle Carter and the whole Carter family, and Johnny Cash, and there was the harder edge rockabilly guys, Gene Vincent, I saw a few times, and the variety of music at different times was just truly astounding for me. But as I said earlier, my father was an influence in that in many ways. He loved music. He was an audiophile, so at 10, 11 years old, he had built Heathkit amplifiers, hi-fi, and turned the basement, which was just a basement, with a furnace in it, put knotty pine walls up in it, and Nolga-hide leather seating, and turned it into. You had his Garrard changer from England out there, and belonged to the American Jazz Society. So every month, an LP would come with a variety of music on it. So I was at 10, 11 years old. I was listening to Bix Beiderbecke, and I was listening to Eddie Condon, and I was listening to. Oh God, there's so many. All the New Orleans jazz guys. I tended to. My father liked some of the big band stuff, and I didn't like that too much. I liked the small combo stuff, the interplay of the musicians, and so I learned how to listen then. But actually, there's another story involved with all that listening to music. When I was 3, and then again much more seriously when I was 7, I had a rheumatic fever, and at that day they didn't really know much to do with that as a heart disease, and they basically would keep you very quiet, and I couldn't play or couldn't run or any of that, And my father being in a medical family, they were very concerned about this, and so. My father's brother was a doctor, a physician, and my father was the dentist. They lived with a few blocks from each other. These are the days. The dental office was in the house, and the physician's office was in their house up the street. In any case, I remember when I was 3.5 or 4, being parked in front of what seemed like it was 90 stories tall, but it was a RCA Victrola. Radio in Victrola, where the top lid came up and you played your 78 records, that I couldn't reach, but I would listen in the weekends to folk music concerts on Saturday and classical music on Sunday, and that was a way for me to deal with the fact that I couldn't be active. And then later on, when I was 7, I got really sick with the disease, and I was parked out for 6 or 8 months to I'll never forget, the Christ Child Farm for Children Hospital. In any case, with 40 girls on one side and a wall, and with a little look-through for the nurses, and 40 boys on the other side, and a couple of private rooms. Well, my father and his brother pulled some weight, so I got one of the private rooms that I shared with another kid. And I was out there for 6 or 8 months. I think 6, 8 months.
Wow.
But I was the experiment and a trial to use a new wonder drug called penicillin that had been used in the later part of the Korean War. And this was 1953, so they started to use it to see its effect on heart disease. I was in one of those blind trials, and my parents made sure I got the side of that had the penicillin. That was a rough deal back then. So in any case, it arrested the disease, and I didn't have permanent heart damage. And today I'm a workout fiend. Of course, I've got a gym sitting right over there. I just worked out before I saw you. But in any case, I used music to, when other kids read, other kids would read, I would listen. So I had my radio, and my father built me some headphones and all that, very crude and all that he used on his ham radio days and all. And he got me some hi-fi headphones in the 50s, and I listened to music all the time. And that really got me into that world, I think. So by the time a few years later, when I discovered the guitar up in the attic, that I had been listening to a lot of music, and I enjoyed it. I started collecting records at the same time at 12, and I go down to Waxy Maxi's Quality Music Store, right next to Waxy Maxi. He had a pencil thin mustache and slick back hair and the whole deal. But I go through the record bins, and there were 45s of Little Walter and Muddy Waters, and I'd bring all these hums, and some of them I've still got upstairs, and I had versions of 78s, and I started collecting and listening to a lot of music, and then when I started playing, of course, then that really mushroomed everything out, So I've still got all my first first albums out there, and we could do an album walkthrough sometime, you know. But I've got Bobby Blue Bland, BB King, and all the early rock and roll and rhythm and blues albums up there that I listen to, Amos Milburn and all that kind of stuff, you know.
It makes so much sense hearing you say all of that, listening through, listen back through to everything in preparation for this interview, and you can hear so many of those influences in a lot of the stuff that you've done. It just makes a lot of sense. And now that you've explained it like that, it's really cool. There is a couple of specific things that I'd just like to ask you about. So we're jumping around in the timeline here,
Sure.
really. But I think...
And we can do more than one of these.
Oh, I mean, that would be amazing. Yeah,
That way you don't have to feel like you can cram all this in and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm sure people will have a lot of questions as a result of this. So it would be cool to do another.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, actually. If we do some today and then gather some questions, and then I'll answer a specific question.
That could be really cool. Yeah. Okay. What's your memories of Woodstock and Altamont Speedway festivals? They were obviously...
Well, they always put the two together, and unfortunately, that's journalists trying to make a bookends of life, you know. But I've got plenty of memories of both of them, you know. I mean, Woodstock, of course, was really the example of. I remember it might have been David Crosby I was talking to. Why we were all waiting on stage. You know, it rained, and we were supposed to go on the night before and went on the next morning and all that, and everybody hung out. There was no place else. It wasn't like today's events. You know, basically it was a flat wooden stage, and everybody hung out. So, and then there was 300,000 people in front of you. But I think that was really the consummate event where we looked around and said, "Geez, there's 300,000 people there's 300,000 of us out there," you know, because there was a certain amount of us versus them. And don't forget, if you had long hair, I couldn't get served in a restaurant, and so, we were the aliens in a lot of part of the land, you know, the festival that you take so much for granted then, it was all so new. Nobody knew how it was going to work out, much less the fact nobody knew that everybody's going to trample down the fences and just invite themselves into what turned out to be a free festival. And so there was a fair amount of drama going on. At the same time, it worked out. And we thought, well, gee, isn't this amazing? I mean, yes, it was a big mess to clean up and all of that, but at the same time, I think it was a desire for all these different musical entities to be together over a 3-day period and present. I think of it as a bookend to Monterey Pop Festival rather than Altamont, which was just the wrong way to do a festival. I'd rather talk about the fact that Monterey presented Ravi Shankar and Otis Redding and all these, a variety of music, a tremendous worldwide variety of music that had normally only been seen at the Monterey Jazz Festival, you know. And this was even something beyond the Monterey Pop Festival, was even something beyond, because you had people in the audience listening to Ravi Shankar in a way they would never. I mean, he's in front of him. He's playing. They're mesmerized by this, and they're listening. They're really listening like you would at a jazz concert, you know, the listeners. So here you flip over to the East Coast, and you have this with many of the acts playing that had now become more established in a couple of years since that, with a lot more variety on the stage. And you have an atmosphere that is just phenomenal to be a part of and watch, and it's kind of like an amoeba moving around like this. We had trouble getting in there. Once we got in there, we stayed in there. Yorm and I came in our station wagon, which was a Ford LTD station wagon, which was the mode of transportation at the time, circa 1968, and we found an access road in the farms. They were farms. This wasn't built up for a festival, and so some people were able to fly in with a helicopter, and some people would, just work their way in, much less get out after it's over. And I remember we had gigs, so finally when we finished that, we moved on through our tour. But it was unusual for everybody, and I think it was an example of, gee, there's so many people that sort of think or subscribe to what we're trying to show, and not just a lifestyle or something, but to show that there was an alternate way of life to a very rigid format. Don't forget, we all grew out of the 50s. We were products of the 40s and 50s. In a much more clamped down, rigid time. We had heard about the Roaring '20s. The late '20s was a great open free time, so to speak, or the 1890s in Paris with the art movement and music movement in the classical world, and everything had seemed to be tied down since the late 20s and 30s, and then all of a sudden, you've got a Second World War, and then you've got the Korean War, and a very rigid format of time, conservative format of time, and then we came on the scene. So the art opened up again, and the music opened up, and the movie making opened up, and you had different directors, and a new batch of directors in making, movies that were a lot more open and daring in their scope and subject matter.
This is the complete antithesis of the really the sort of intelligent assessment of the 1960s that you've just put across. But the organisational freak in me wants to know what it was like playing on stage at 8 o'clock in the morning. And did you sleep the night
absolutely.
before?
Of course not. Hey, listen, I'm 27 years old. I can stay up all night. There might have been some enhancements, but I can't remember right now. But, we all, there's rain delays, delays there. Don't forget, half the stuff I wasn't sure was grounded right, there was a couple of cases of people getting fried when they touched their guitar, and people had, guys had, there's a couple of, I forgot his name, there's one singer had passed away because of that. So it was, there was caution there. Don't forget, there was this stage that was the great idea. I'm not sure whose it was. Maybe it was Monk's, Chipmunk. But anyway, the stage, the great idea was, it was a circular stage, like in London, the Roundhouse.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And the locomotive goes in, turns around, goes back in the other direction. We played the Roundhouse. I love that place. In any case, the stage was circular, and it was on tracks and everything. And the idea was one half, put a little, one half would be setting up the band, and you can see the guys smoking. This is gonna be a great idea, man. And it would just turn around, and there'd be the next act stuff all set up, and then they'd tear off all that. Well, they put all the equipment on there, and it went like this and never moved again. So that was it.
Oh, man.
But the concept was there. Now they can do it. But they built and sawed and hammered that stage together all for a few days beforehand. It was really a phenomenal amount of work. And all this talent came back. Let me mention too. In that, say, 1965 in San Francisco, part of the uniqueness of that we all felt was, it's kind of like our older brothers went into the straight world, so to speak, and the younger brothers and some of the older brothers dropped out, where you had talent coming in to the so-called San Francisco scene that was out of the aerospace industry, and they had expertise at making composite material and working with electronics. Working. That's how all the guys went into when we modified our instruments and put in electronics in them and tried to bring the fidelity up. There weren't any sound systems. They were PA systems. They all sounded like you were at the racetrack. And they started, the talent started to use nice big Macintosh amplifiers, 300 watts, and stack them up. I got tons of pictures right here of me using them for my bass amplifiers, and then a Fender Showman top for a preamp. And then we made our own cabinets out of 3/4 inch plywood with the heaviest things on earth. But the idea was that they got supposedly better sound, and they started stacking those up. You've seen the pictures, the Grateful Dead, the wall of sound, and all that. But when we started working with more and more volume, the singers couldn't and had difficulty because the sound systems for the singer, for the sound reinforcement, wasn't up to par. So all that whole industry developed out of that scene. In the clothing world and fashion, people started the audience. What was great was when we played, played Golden Gate Park and played Mount Tamalpais, one of the early festivals out there. You had people taking their fantasy and going into old shops and finding granite glasses and things and suits and different types of clothing. For some reason, out in the West, a lot of bands identified with the old mid-1860s Wild West or whatever. In England, it was the mods and rockers and all that, and dressing up. For us, it was much more unorganized. I mean, people would just start to kind of fashion and make their own clothes. For us on stage, we had a Jeannie the Tailor in San Francisco and Jeannie the Tailor here in Los Angeles. And I used to get all the clothes you see me in from that period. I go down to Guatemala and shop and get bolts of material and hand it to them, or go into a fabric store and find just stuff I liked, and we'd make clothes, But out in the audience, people would have to start to have their own look. It wasn't just the people on the stage. So people were able to be creative and fill out some of their fantasies, about role fulfilling in the characters they would play. And as they started to be able to do some of that and make a living at it, it was for an alternative way that besides being shuttled into a corporate slot of a cog in a wheel, and I think that's important to mention with all of that. That for a period for a 5 or 6 or 7 year period of time, the sense of community as it expanded, and styles changed and things changed, and then it dissipated. But for a while, it was really a unique world in San Francisco and on London as well. It was a different look the young people had. And it wasn't just about fashion, so to speak.
Yeah, I hear you. Much bigger than that. In terms of sort of the...
Well, it was a little more individual. It wasn't that it was bigger. It was just you wanted to play a bigger part of your own image, You wanted to assimilate more of yourself out there.
Yeah, it felt like you finally
rather than
had
put on something and be something. Mm-hmm. Later on, it was that. Yeah. All of a sudden you go down to Macy's and they had a polka dot hippie outfit. Outfit, by the time the 70s came. And then, of course, everybody started, okay, I've had it. Things dissipate a bit,
Well, that's the way it. It's kind of like the same with areas and sort of gentrification where the creatives take over.
I mean, yeah. You that little the closeness goes, and you know, things move, and that's the way it should be. I mean, it's always going to be that way. So you know.
I have to ask you about the about Hendrix and that kind of
Go right ahead.
stuff that happened. So the obviously you played on Voodoo Child, which was the I think we've already talked about the 15-minute jam version of it that you mentioned it before, and
Yeah.
then it got trimmed down to a releasable.
Well, no, it's really a different song. You know, you know, it was really a different song. You know, I mean, the Future Child's Slight Return you're referring to.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a different song. I mean, listen to it. It's a different song.
Yeah.
So that was, but I found Jimmy to be a very gracious guy. A very, you know, I guess I identified easily with him because he was in that R&B scene, you know, before he was sort of reinvented out in London, and when I first met him, you know, and he was at Monterey Pop Festival, but when he started coming up to San Francisco and playing, Bill Graham, who owned the Fillmore Auditorium, was our manager at the time, and we rehearsed there all the time and played there many, you know, we were one of the first bands to play there at the new Fillmore. And we shared many a bill with many different folks. And we shared a couple with Jimi Hendrix as well. And I fell in right away with Jimmy, but particularly with Mitch Mitchell. I just loved of course, all his jazz sensibilities in there.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'll talk more about that in a second. But and of course Noel Redding, and so we had a rehearsal spot next door at a synagogue there, and right next to Fillmore, and so when we shared bills, you know, when we had a chance, we jam a bunch of times, and just because we appreciate, you know, good musicians want to meet other musicians, you know. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like you were lined up along the wall in competition with the other bands, you know, like in D.C., you know, don't say anything, you know, and so we fell in with each other really easily, and a couple of years later, when we were in the Jefferson Airplane was in New York, I believe, to do the Dick Cavett show, or one of those kind of shows, right in New York City. Later on, Jimmy was recording in New York, and he had just taken over his session. I believe his producer had been let go, Chaz Chandler, and he had started doing this himself. Traffic was on their first tour of the U.S., I believe that's correct, playing a small half underground club in New York called Steve Paul's Scene. So we finished our taping of that TV show early, and it was around 11:30. So we heard that the traffic was over there. So in those days, Norm and I never traveled anywhere without our instruments. At all times, you carried it. You never know. So at that club at Steve Paul's Scene, we were listening to traffic, and Hendrix came in, and we had met each other, you know, and all, and we just gravitated, you know, we'd played jam together and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. He said, "Listen, I'm working on my album over here after the show," and he knew Steve Winwood and all those traffic guys from the scene in London that he was part of. So a bunch of us went back over to the studio, and then by then it was around 2 a.m. or something. We watched him work on some stuff, and maybe there was 15 of us there or something. Most of it hang out in the studio while he did some overdub tracks or worked on some songs or went into the isolation booth and played around in there. Not any music. And then along about close to daybreak in the morning, he said, "Listen, let's play blues." You know, so Steve Winwood was there, of course, and then Mitch, and they had a Fender Showman. We tossed on the side, but put in. I plugged into that, you know, and then we went over. He said, "Here's the changes right here, like this," you know, and we went over it a little bit. We just started to do a take, and he broke a string, and then we noodled around, and then we did a whole take, the one that was released, I believe. And then Lloyd, it was about 7:30 in the morning. We finished up 8 daybreak. We had to jump in that proverbial station wagon and drive down to Washington D.C. because we had a show that next night. So we're up in New York and took off. But as far as the song itself goes, he was a very gracious player. Easy to look into his eyes, easy to play. There, no pretense, no nothing. Just a good, warm human being who just was a marvelous musician. So that together with Mitch Mitchell, we had become buddies then, and really just hung out and talked a lot. Spent a lot of time together. We just hit it off and had fun, and did the track, and it was great. And I really didn't think anything of it because I don't know, we got back home from our tour a month later or something. It was in San Francisco, and we were rehearsing in the Fulton Street house, with this big old mansion that we had bought to use for offices and rehearsal halls. We were down in the basement, and I got a phone call, and it was from Jimi Hendrix, and I said, "Hey, man, how you doing?" And he says, "Listen, would you mind if we put that cut we did?" I said, "What cut?" He said, "That long jam we did." I said, "That's got to be 15 minutes long. Are you nuts?" And he says, I'm going to put out a double album, we can do it. And I said, "Fine, that'd be great. Yeah, I'm honored. It'd be cool." And then the rest is history.
I read a quote from Eddie Kramer that talked about Jimmy's attitude towards sessions being reasonably organised, even if it wasn't,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
I think you'll find anybody that is good is organized.
Yes.
The perception, the people's perception of you, it's taking drugs, smoking dope all the time, and doing all the night, or is usually incorrect. When you get down to work, you're organized. There's a lot of distractions, but yes, absolutely. So when we went in to cut that song, people have said that to me before too. Oh, you guys jammed? No, we're musicians. We listen to each other, and we played the changes and the song that was laid out in front of me. It wasn't a jam. It had and parts and things to remember to do. Otherwise, it would sound like a jam, and you'd never hear it.
So he, you'd clearly had a bit of history with him, and maybe it was happenstance that you ran into each other that night, but
absolutely, it was happenstance, and that would have happened. I mean, all that, yes, that's happenstance. But once you're in there holding your instrument, recording, you want to do the best you can because that's what we do.
Of course, and he must have had an inkling that there was something to be gained from you being there to invite you to play that particular
Well, like I said,
song.
we had played some before, and we gravitated to each other, and he'd listen to all my stuff, and I'd listen to all his stuff, and we had played on the same bill together, and I had heard him many nights in a row. What was great about afterwards is that when he played Winterland a little while later, or the Oakland Coliseum, I finally had a hook. I had a song that I recorded with him we could play on stage along with Red House and a bunch of other stuff that wasn't part of his, or things that Noel Redding had played. So there's a shot of us playing together at Winterland, or no, maybe it's Oakland Coliseum, and Noel's playing guitar and I'm playing bass. So the great thing about that was, I could be invited up on stage, and we had something solid to go into. Because nobody wanted to do a jam where you didn't know what you were doing.
Precisely, that's
it. Doesn't mean you don't free flow, or you don't improvise it the best you can that night, but you've got to be hooked into that night. I mean, you're on stage. You want to do what you do as best you can.
Of course, absolutely. Then the sort of final thing I want to speak to you about, which is I suppose it's a little bit selfish, but I've been listening to the most recent Hot Tuna album, which was the 2011 Steady As She Goes, and it was recorded at Levon Helm's studio.
Right.
I just wanted to.
God bless Levon. Rest in peace.
That's it. So I just want to ask you
Speaking of
about.
a great guy, Levon, what a drummer, what a singer, what a player, what a gracious gentleman he was. And he was good buddies with Art. And he was, uh, uh, I love Levon. And unfortunately, I never got to play with him more than a few times at festivals and things like that. Yeah.
Was was that why that particular studio for that album? And
It was familiar with it. Yorma had lived up there and knew a lot of those people in Woodstock. He had lived in that area of Woodstock for many years. So, but Larry Campbell also worked out of there, our producer at the time. So it was a good natural spot, and everybody felt they'd be comfortable to work there. And of course, Levon was right there in the other room, as part of the house and all of that. So. Uh, it was a good choice to do, and we enjoyed it.
cool. I said that was the last thing. I've turned my page of my notes now, and I've got. It's almost like some. These are a bit more Q&A questions, I suppose. But
Yeah.
one thing that one thing I'm curious about is the sense of humor in all of the like the Hot Tuna and the Jefferson Airplane stuff. There's obviously some of the song names or album titles that. I mean, I have a
Yeah, but
feeling they may have come from you, but where is it, these sort
you
of
know,
calling an album burgers?
but that's I think that's part of that San Francisco scene. Unlike, say, shall we say, in Los Angeles, where it's very hard for those guys to have humor about themselves. I won't mention who, but you know, most of us come from a pretty varied background. Yorma had traveled the world. His father was in the State Department, so he brings a lot to the table. He's a writer. He's a crafter of words. He loves. Listen to his lyrics. It isn't about moon and June and croon, and he's not just chasing women all the time, going baby, 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 baby. And I think with that, as well as Grace, has a terrific intellect. Paul Kantner did, and all of us we enjoy a sense of humor, but having a sense of humor about yourselves. I mean, you're passionate about your craft or whatnot, but at the same time, you're watching this thing mushroom around you and seeing things and people's interpretations of it and whatnot. And you got to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, we're all. We're all along for a ride on this. Let's not take ourselves in too grand a manner here. I mean, yes, like you said earlier, Jimi Hendrix, very organized and very serious what I'm doing. That doesn't mean that he took himself that seriously in the way that some people will do. I think you have to. It's a matter of releasing some of the tension of things that are out of your control. And there's things that are out of control that put so much stress on groups of people working together. I mean, it's an odd business, being in a band or working with people. It's the only art form, I think, where you go up, where you assemble together different people and you create an entity. I mean, you don't see 6 painters going up very often to the same canvas.
No.
You don't even see 2 piano players playing together very often. I mean, it's unique when they do it. So it's an odd art form. I mean, we in the Jefferson Airplane, we were fortunate. If you were going to put a band together, a pro would never, he picked more. Paul coming out of the background of the Weavers and folk music from then, and vocal stuff like that. Yorma coming out of the Guitar Piedmont single school of interpretation of blues and music, but at the same time having a worldview of music that has traveled his whole life, very sophisticated. All the influences that I've had, Grace coming actually from a classical background is why her songs that she composed on the piano are so unique and interesting. You put all that together, and Marty Ballin, was was had been doing pop songs in 1962, on his own, So, and loved to write and craft his own songs. You put all that together, and the fun part of it, while it lasted for its 7 years, was seeing what came out of it, and not necessarily. I mean, everybody wants to do a good job and try to do the best they can, but everybody involved was as surprised as anybody else about how something would turn out like that. So, in Hot Tuna, Norm and I work harder now than we ever have on stage. We listen harder than we ever have because we're always trying to get it that night. You're always trying to get it right. And these last 50 weeks of his quarantine concert series that he's posted from his Furpies Ranch stage, I've visited him out there a few times. I'm about to go back out, as I said, for a month or so, and then we're going to do some shows finally after a year of not playing in front of people. It's in its own way, it has reset all of our playing and our goals, and we are more intense and work harder than we ever have than before. Why shouldn't you? Yesterday shouldn't be anything more than yesterday. I mean, today and the future is what's important.
Absolutely. I think that's such a lovely way to look at it. Yeah, I agree with you completely. So not looking to the future, looking back to the past,
Yes.
do you have any particular either albums or moments in your career? I mean, you've had musically speaking, it's been such a broad, eclectic mix of things you've done. But is there anything that maybe not necessarily just down to success, but something that you're proud of because of perhaps the way it came together or the way it finished up? Or
Well, if I look back to the back, I was working out this morning, and I put my iTunes collection on and just put it on shuffle, and I'm listening to all kinds of varieties of music, and then a song comes off from Surrealistic Pillow or something. I didn't even recognize it. No, I'm just playing it. Boy, that bass is kind of that song, I'm surprised how hard we all tried at such a young age, but then again, the bar's been raised so much. So many young people are playing so much better now and more, with more articulation in a lot of ways. I always have faith in the young people coming around. So I tend to not look at it as any favorite periods of time. I'm really looking forward to next Tuesday getting in my Winnebago Adventurer and driving across country with one of my Tom Rebecca Jack basses. These acoustic basses here.
oh wow, that's really cool. Yeah.
This here, all of these I started after my dear wife Diana passed away in 2012. I was just sitting here crushed, and I was playing one of my acoustic basses, and I said, they really haven't done any science. They haven't done any work in acoustic bass guitars at all. They're really just a big jumbo guitar with 4 strings on it. So I found Tom Rebecca, actually through one of my students, who was making instruments up in Healdsburg, California, and we got together and we started making a series of what's called Diana basses for me to play in the acoustic configuration that Norm and I play together so much. And we do a more of that than electric. And I wanted a true acoustic guitar that would hold up across the room from Yorma's acoustic guitar and sound like a bass guitar, not like a baritone bass where you always wanted to plug it in. I wanted to work with a true acoustic instrument. And what I have here is
The sustain's gorgeous on it.
Yeah. So I've now got 4 of these instruments, and we've been experimenting with that. But if you go on Tom Rebecke's site, RIBBECKEE, we do a little video and a story about it and whatnot. But anyway, after you talk with Stacey Parrish, after our interview and when you get your stuff together, you can get a lot more background about some of the newer stuff I'm doing too.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would like to just I'd love you to speak about that now. So you mentioned that you've got an album coming out hopefully in the summer.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I don't talk about the pandemic in the album. This album is it's all instrumental, and I work with many great musicians on it. Daniel Maison, Yair Dalal, number of other musicians, but it's a close, intimate style where I've recorded here both in Los Angeles, and I have my home and studio in Jersey, Channel Islands, in St. Martin. And so we've recorded over the last 3 years, and we're ready to put it out. So more will be revealed.
So 3 years in the making.
Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully by the time this goes out, I'll have a little bit more to say on where people can find out about that, or if they.
Yes. After you talk to Stacey, we're finalizing and getting up to the marketing stage and how we're going to put it out and when it'll come out. So yes.
Super. Lastly, this is a question I ask everybody: is if you were to give any advice to a young musician, or not necessarily even a young musician, just somebody looking to sort of make their way in music or to create music, not even necessarily make a living out of it, but just to create, what would do you have a piece of advice that sort of springs to mind as being prevalent?
Stay true to yourself. You stay true to your beliefs and work within that. And find the unique you. You are unique. Everybody is unique. Everybody is unique. There's nobody out there that's not unique. But there are many people that get sidetracked in finding that uniqueness in yourself and manifesting it into an entity, like a piece of music. And you have to work at it. I mean, Yorm and I have worked millions of hours on our instruments, and for him, his vocals and his songwriting. He tells everybody, if you want to write, you must read. You must improve your vocabulary. You must expand your vocabulary so that you can express yourself more ways, more unique ways, but more accurately, so you can find the way to get to the kernel of the truth, whether your finger's on the notes or whether you're writing it out on paper.
So there we have it, Jack Casady. What a great guy. I could have spoken to him all day. It was such an honor to have that conversation. And I really hope that you enjoyed listening to that. Jack's got some really exciting stuff happening. So if you do not follow him on socials, he's on Facebook, he's on Instagram, and you can check out his website, and I'll put links to all these things in the show notes. He wouldn't tell me too much about what's going on, but there's some cool stuff happening towards the summer and beyond. And hopefully I'll be involved in publicising that through this podcast in some capacity. So hopefully there'll be more to come from Jack in the future. I'm just astounded. It's such an amazing conversation to have had, and to speak to somebody who's had those experiences is unbelievable. And he's stayed so humble, and just his love of music and his passion for music is so clear. The next episodes next week, I am speaking with Ivana Manley from Manley Laboratories, which if any of you are gearheads, you'll know who that is and what Manley Laboratories is. Manley is a outboard gear company who specialise in valve technology, which is why I was interested to speak to Ivana. And she heads the company and started out sort of doing bits and bobs at the company before ending up running it. She's one of the most inspirational people I've ever spoken to. She's amazing, and you'll absolutely enjoy this episode. She talks about all of the history of Manley. She talks about some sort of technical things to do with valve technology, and we talk about some of the pieces of gear that made Manley a sort of modern classic in terms of outboard gear. So yeah, you'll really enjoy that. So that's coming next week. So that just leaves me to say, if you want to get in touch with me, you can do that. My email address is joe@allyouneedisdrums.com. You can visit my website, which is www.allyouneedisdrums.com. And if you want to support the podcast by buying a mug, you can do that at the shop section of my website. And that's it. Feel free to get in touch. I always enjoy hearing from people, and I love hearing your suggestions. So that just leaves me to say a huge thank you to my good friend Joe Kane for the intro and outro music he supplies for this podcast, and my other good friend, David Henshaw, for the artwork that he supplies every week now. So yeah, have a fantastic week, and I will speak to you next Tuesday. Goodbye!